Good afternoon. This week I'm going to be speaking about two Parshas, Shoftim and Teitzei, two Parshiot. No, this is not a double Parsha weekend. You didn't miss anything. It's not a double Parsha. It's just that next week my family and I will be on a vacation in Cape Cod. We will be there almost 2 weeks. And so I apologize preemptively for any short shrifting that results in doing both Parshiot together, but I want and need to take a real vacation. So that's what I'm doing. I'm entitling this Leadership is Not So Easy, and I'm definitely focusing on Shoftim more than Teitzei. If you want more on Teitzei, you can go to previous years. And by the way, now I am populating all of my Parsha discussions on my YouTube channel. If you just go YouTube, Sandra, Saundra Epstein, you will get to it and you can find them there as well. So we begin. Fast Company, a business placement organization, defines these 4 characteristics of good and solid leadership in a released publication in 2014. 1. Expertise. What leaders know. It is a key for gaining approval and respect from followers and subordinates. 2. Metacognition. Whereas expertise refers to what you know, metacognition is about being aware of what you don't know, leading to 3. Coachability. Can people in leadership positions step back from the hubris that often pushes them to acknowledge that they need help and must build and rely on a team of competent people to work together and learn from each other? And finally, integrity. Do the proper principles and well-designed goals that will be for the benefit of all guide leaders? Will they step away or pivot when something is wrong and not ethical? So let us apply this to what we learn about leadership in our Parsha. It begins as follows. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha l'shabtecha v'shivchu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. You will set up judges and law enforcement officers for yourselves in all your cities that the Lord your God is giving you for your tribes, and they will judge the people with mishpat tzedek, righteous judgment, needing both, needing judgment, the part that says no, and righteousness or mercy or compassion, the part that says yes, and to balance the two. Lo tatem mishpat, you should not pervert justice. You will not show favoritism. You will not take a bribe, because bribery blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words. And then a phrase that we all know, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice. Notice it's tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, not mishpat, mishpat, tirdof. Tzedek, tzedek, justice, justice, you shall pursue. Righteousness, judging, justice, okay? That you may live and possess the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So notice that this comes before any statement, which will now come up, of practices and forbidden involvements. In Tzedek Tzedek Tirdov, the Sifrei, based on Sanhedrin 32b, talks about you must have a good court. I was just speaking recently with someone about how it's interesting that of the mitzvot that are commanded to the Bnei Noach, to all of humanity, one of them is to set up a court. That is not stated in as much clarity and concise words as many other things are in the Torah. Yet it is always subsumed. We know that Moshe is told by Yitro to have his 71 elders. We're told that you should not pervert justice. We're told that you bring a child, a rebellious child, as we'll see later, to the gates. And there's always this presumption that there is a court system, that there is a development of a system that will maintain justice, which then is described in great detail in the Gemara. We are then told, back to our Parsha, you shall not plant for yourself an Asherah, which is a type of tree that was used for idol worship, near the altar where you will be praying to God. You shall not set up yourself a monument which God hates. After more instructions of a ritual do and do not nature, we come to the next chapter of Israel's life and the leadership that will be necessary for this community at this point. In chapter 17, verse 14, we read, Ki tavo el ha'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, v'yirashtcha v'yashavta ba v'amarta asima alai melech k'chol hagoyim asher sevivotai. First of all, the singular is used, so it's dealing with the collective. And it says, you will come to the land the Lord your God is giving you. You will possess it. You will live there. And you will say, now, I am going to set upon myself, asima alai melech, I will choose for myself a king, just like all the other nations around us. So many problems. Wrong motivation. Right need, but not based on the correct reasons. It will be acknowledged that there are different types of leadership. We have Moshe, then we have Yahushua, then we have the elders, we're going to have the Navi, the prophets, the Shoftim, the judges. We're going to have all these different types of leaders. And yes, we will have a melech. But, first of all, the people themselves will not choose outside of the dictates of God who will be their leader. And we will see that there are many, many restrictions there. And the second thing is, K'chol hagoyim asher sevivotai, choose for me a king, because then we can be like all the others. No. When your child comes to you and says, but mom, I want X because everyone else has it, not the reason. What purpose does it serve for you? Is it the right thing? Is it harmful? There's all these questions that come up. But then we're told, Vasum tasim, the imperative format, you will surely set up a king over you. But what does it say? Asher yivchar Hashem. God will choose the king. From amongst your brothers, mikarav achicha tasim alecha melech. From amongst your brothers, God will set the king over you. You will not appoint a foreigner over yourself, one who is not part of your people. Now come the restrictions. A king, right? We've certainly seen hubris, and we've seen runaway taking on of power amongst too many of the leaders in our world today. But notice what it's indicated here. He may not have too many horses, that he will bring the people back to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. For God says, you shall not return. In other words, they knew that there were horses in Egypt. You cannot say, the king cannot come and say, okay, now that I'm king, we're going to go back and get all the horses. All right? He will not take many wives for himself, lo yerba lo nashim, and his heart must not turn away, and he will not have too much kesef v'zahav, too much silver and gold. In other words, he should not become so wedded and enamored with the material wealth that the power of this position conveys to him, because then, of course, power begets power, and we all know how that goes. He must provide for all those around him. In other words, he cannot accumulate individual wealth above and beyond everyone else, and that any wealth accumulated is to, according to Rashi and Sifri and the Sanhedrin, the Talmud, the Gemara and Sanhedrin, Masechet Sanhedrin, it says he may acquire what is needed for people and for the well-being of the community, but not take all of the goodies for himself. And it will be, chapter 17, we're still in verse 18, when he sits upon his royal throne, Ketavlo et Mishneh HaTorah Hazot al Sefer Melifnei HaKohanim HaLevim. He should write for himself 2 copies of the Torah on a scroll, which is before the Levitic Kohanim. When he does this, according to Sifrei, then his kingdom will remain established. So, number 1, has to be chosen by God. The people can, I guess, have a vote, but maybe not a veto. God has to determine who will be the king. He cannot acquire too much material wealth so that he will go back, or so that he will use it over the, in terms of his power to take over the people in ways he should not. He should not be led astray, and he must have 2 copies of the Torah. And in the Gemara, we're told, One is placed in the treasury for safekeeping, and one goes with him wherever he goes, so that he knows he has the rules, his dictates with him. He should keep his copy with him and read from it every day of his life, so that he may learn to have awe for God and to keep all the words of Torah. Now, if the king, there's a little hint here of something. If the king is approved by God, is amongst the people, does not have too many wives, does not have too many horses, abides by all these things, why do we have the words, L'ma'an yomad liyara? Why not just in order that he have awe for God? Why does he have to learn it? Doesn't he already know this? Why do we add this? And I think that it is to state that even with the best of intentions and the best of motivations, there are things in our lives that will pull us in directions that are not healthy or correct directions. And we have to continually learn. Think about the idea of saying the Shema every night before you go to bed. Think about davening every day. We continually learn that what we have, our brachot, are from God, that we should have gratitude for them, that we should understand that we are continuing to grow. We're never beyond needing those reminders. Therefore, he will learn continually and not forget to have awe for God. And then the reason is given. Levilti rum levavo me'achiv ulevilti sor min hamitzvah. So that his heart will not become haughty over his brothers, and so that he will not turn from the commandment. Yamin or small, to the right or to the left, Laman yarich yamim al ma'achuta. So that the days of his kingdom will be prolonged for him and his sons and all of Israel. So now we see our four components from our model that we shared from Fast Company expressed here. 1, expertise. The individual who is going to be king shall be put in place, and it must be one of their own who knows the ways of his nation, the code of law that instructs him. And be reminded daily. Metacognition, not being alone, and thus needing this ongoing help. Knowing, even going back to some models where we see where God, with Benot Lavchad, or, in various circumstances where God says, yes, you're right, let's do it this way. So metacognition, no human being knows it all and needs everyone else. So the king is never above and beyond. Coachability, keeping the Torah with him, keeping the Levites and the Kohanim close so that he does not go far away from what is intended. And integrity, to be practiced by the many limits placed on this person and the bandwidth of their power. Further, as time goes on, another leadership category will present, that of the prophet, to help maintain checks and balances for the king. In chapter 18, we read, for those nations which you are to possess, Ki hagoyim ela asher atem yereshotam el ma'ananim ve'el kosamim yishme'u v'atalog chen natan lecha Hashem Elokecha. Listen to the diviners and to the soothsayers and all of that. But for you, God has not given you those. You do not listen to me'ananim and kosmim. You're not listening to the soothsayers, to the magicians, to the people that are going to tell you, you listen to God. The Navi, and notice the word Navi, we will bring, Lahavi, a prophet from amongst you, from your brothers, like me. The Lord, Moshe is saying this, the Lord your God will set upon you, and you shall hearken to him. And God said to me, Vayomer Hashem Elai, Moshe again is still speaking, they have done well in what they have spoken. I will set up a prophet for them from amongst their brothers, like you, Moshe. And I will put my words V'natati devarai b'piv, in their mouths, in his mouth, and he will speak that I command him. Now, in the following week's Parsha, in next week's Parsha, the second one that I'm going to talk about, Ki Teitzei, it focuses on outside interactions, mostly in war, which has begun in this week's Parsha, when the instructions are given how to go to war when one goes out. Ki Teitzei l'milchama el oivecha v'natanu Hashem Elokecha biyadecha b'shavit yashim yad. If you go out to war against your enemies, the Lord your God will deliver that enemy into your hands, and you shall take the captives. Now, this certainly leads many to think that certain abuses or certain prejudices or what have you are validated here. But hold that thought in terms of what is going on. And we're going to use the example of the Yefatar, the Eshet Yefatar, the beautiful woman. You see amongst the captives a beautiful woman that you desire her, you may take her for a wife. Now remember, we're talking to the Amcha here. The king has already been told not too many wives. But Chaim Yankel, the soldier, sees somebody. You will bring her into your home. She shall shave her head, let her nails grow. She will remove the garment of her captivity. She will stay in your house and mourn for her family for a month. After that, you may take her for a wife. And if you decide that you do not desire her, then you can send her wherever she wants, but you may not sell her for money. You may not keep her as a servant because you have taken her and desired her. So, what is this to say? It's if you think about it, on one hand, it definitely discourages the activity, and we're told that this is one of the mitzvot, and this appears for the first time in Devarim, that accommodate the human reality, but not the ideal of how we're supposed to behave. So it sets all these restrictions, and therefore the restrictions should make you think twice. We've seen restrictions for the king. We now see restrictions for the Amcha for the nation when they're going out to war. And then there's another new instruction that has not appeared previously in our Torah about the Ben Sarah Amara, about the wayward and rebellious son. Yele ish ben Sarah Amara enenu shemea b'kol aviv u'b'kol imo Yisrael tov v'lo yishma aleim. A person has a wayward and rebellious son, a child who does not obey mom or dad. They chasten him, but he still doesn't listen. The mother and father will take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of the place, and they say to the elders, "This son of ours is incorrigible, wayward and rebellious. He does not obey us." And what are the signs that are given? Zovel v'soveh. He's a glutton and a guzzler. He eats too much meat, he drinks too much wine. And all the men of the city will pelt him to death with stones, and he shall die. So you shall clear out evil from amongst you, and all of Israel will listen in fear. Now, these two practices seem strange, at least, and perhaps draconian at worst. Perhaps, again, they are to set a standard that would dissuade behavior that would be considered aberrant, so that these are not, in fact, enacted. We are told that while Ben Sarah Amara remains as a standard, it never actually happened. At this point, there's a litany of practices that one is not to engage in and more instructions of what to do. It is precisely at this moment that the Bnei Yisrael are not living within their own little bubble. Ki Teitzei, they've gone out. They're interacting with other people. They're people of their own agency. They're not in Egypt. They're not being controlled. They are people who are free with individual agency, but that agency is dictated and limited by God on all levels. And I know that this may sound like an inherent contradiction, but they are to maintain the four characteristics of leadership as well for each one. After all, this is a mamlechet kohanim in which each person must take on the responsibility of personal freedoms properly exercised with limits and restraints. Integrity. Later in chapter 24, we read towards the end of Ki Teitzei, a refrain of what we've already learned. Lo tata mishpat ger yatum v'lo takbal beget almana. You do not pervert the judgment of a stranger or an orphan, and you will not take a widow's garment as security. V'zacharta, and you should, and again, this is all singular. You should remember collectively, ki even hayita, that you were collectively a slave in Egypt, and that the Lord your God redeemed you from there, therefore I command you to do this thing. Now, this collective singular has two foci. One, it shows that the dictates are incumbent upon every member of the collective. And two, the singular refers simultaneously to each and every person. No one is exempt. So it's doing both at the same time. The notion of not perverting the judgment or the justice process of a stranger or an orphan, they have no one to advocate for them. An orphan doesn't have parents. A stranger doesn't know anybody. So you cannot take advantage of the fact that they don't know anybody. And not taking a widow's garment as security, what they used to do in those days was they would take what we would call today collateral. But collateral was not, the mortgage on a very nice house. The collateral was perhaps the coat on your back. And you're not allowed to do that to a widow because the widow can't pay back, and that's all the widow has. So in other words, this is mishpat and tzedek together. Yes, you have a system of justice and judgment. You have a system where people are held accountable. And you recognize the needs of different people and you act accordingly. Now, why do these two practices of Difatar, Isha Eshet Difatar, and the Ben Saramora, the rebellious child, and the Yifatar, the beautiful woman, why does this appear within these laws of war and how you fight and all that? And there's other things too. You're supposed to offer peace, and if they accept peace, then you don't fight. It's not a foregone conclusion that you bring out the guns or sticks and stones and you start beating on people. You offer peace. You try to make amends. You try to work on something. You do not. We are not a war-hungry people. So here we will see, in these two Parshiot, practices of abuse, desire for more and more power and privilege, and an acknowledgement that there's lack of equity amongst community members. And these are not to be part of the way you act. This is not halacha, this is not the way you walk, observing halacha, observing Jewish law. This is not the way of your citizens. For you, Torah achat le'ezrach u'leger. The laws are the same for the citizen and the stranger amongst you. You do not hurt the widow. You do not hurt the stranger. You do not hurt the orphan. You do not take advantage of people. You do not pervert justice where you favor the rich one over the poor one, or the poor one over the rich one, for that matter. You have the responsibility of setting the example of how you act. That's what it means to be Mamlechet Kohanim. There's a leadership structure, but just like we said, everybody is included here, both as a collective and as individuals. The same thing here. Everyone has a leadership role, if you will, a role to set an example for others. I love when I go to Ramah Day Camp for our kids. Now, Yoella, my oldest daughter's youngest, just had her last summer there. But the counselors all wear a T-shirt that says Dugma, role model. What a lovely idea that we all be role models for each other. Clearly, we note today that these many abuses are found amongst us. There are leaders who claim that the constitution of their country does not apply to them, There are leaders who take advantage of the fact that there is no constitution and try to obliterate the checks and balances between different arms of their government. People are suffering. They are being taken advantage of. Justice is being perverted. It is not Mishpat Tzedek. Nechama Leibowitz and others have identified the 4 areas of leadership discussed in Parshat Shoftim as follows and amplified elsewhere, such as in Teitzei. 1. Judicial. We must recall that setting up Batei Din, the courts, and a system of correct justice and judgment was actually one of the 7 laws given to Bnei Noach before we even begin to discuss the nation of Bnei Israel. 2. Halachic. The establishment of the High Court is discussed here as a vehicle to maintain proper behaviors according to the dictates indicated by Ribbon Shalom, by God. 3. Political. Rules for the establishment of community rule, the monarchy that will exist, boundaries of land, and so much else are indicated here so that limits will be defined. And finally, spiritual. The Kohanim and the Leviim, and later the prophets, provide a separate arm of leadership that is to hold the people and the political rulers accountable in maintaining the system of halacha and justice as incepted, and to differentiate this from people of other nations that they will meet and with whom they will interact. Again, we see the need for balance of expectations and power distribution. This is an acknowledgement of how we maintain those 4 most important aspects of leadership with which we began. Expertise. Leadership is not about knowing or dictating everything. Rather, it is found in metacognition, the understanding of our human limitations and awareness of the potential egocentrism of our personal perspective to be mitigated by coachability, always understanding that we have our sphere of activity and that it must be within the frame of accountability to others and integrity, that all of this must be done properly and for the good of all. Mishpat Tzedek. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs explains, the Parsha of Shoftim is the classic source of the 3 types of leadership in Judaism, called by the sages the 3 crowns: priesthood, kingship, and Torah. This is the first statement in history of the principle set out in the 18th century by Montesquieu in L'Esprit de Louis, the Spirit of Laws, and later made fundamental to the American Constitution as the separation of powers. Power in the human arena is to be divided and distributed, not concentrated in a single person or office. In biblical Israel, there were kings, priests, and prophets. Kings had secular or governmental power. Priests were the leaders of the religious domain, presiding over the service of the temple and other rites and giving rulings on matters to do with holiness and purity. Prophets were mandated by God to be critical of any corruption of power and to recall to the people their religious vocation whenever they drifted from it. Further, it was none other than Rabbi Sachs who teaches continually throughout his works, who taught. Good leaders lead properly. Great leaders enable others to lead through proper example. Here we find the Mamlechet Kohanim, the nation of priests, where we are all leaders. We are all responsible for our behaviors. We find the explanation that at Machane Ramah Yomi, at Ramah Day Camp, all of the counselors are a dugma, both collectively and individually. As we think about leadership, both in its largesse and in our daily lives, may we all merit to be part of our Mamlechet Kohanim and strive to be our best selves while teaching others by examples wherever and whenever we go out into the world. Ki Teitzei. As we go out, may we be the leaders that lead with Mishpat Tzedek, righteous judgment. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful 2 weeks. And I remind you that all of this can be found both on my Facebook account, Facebook Sunny Epstein, just you may have to be let in, I don't know, and on the YouTube channel. And if you just Google YouTube, Sandra, Sandra Epstein, you will find it. Lehitraot. I wish you all a safe, healthy, and rejuvenating 2 weeks. Shabbat Shalom. And I wish all a meaningful and thoughtful Rosh Chodesh Elul. Lehitraot.